Assassin's Creed Black Flag is back, and it's not just a simple remaster. 13 years later, Black Flag Resynced runs on Ubisoft's latest Anvil engine technology, bringing ray-traced global illumination with ray-traced reflections and a much more detailed open world. It looks stunning, but it's also seriously demanding, and spoiler alert, not every setting gives you the FPS boost you'd expect. What's going on, everyone? My name is Monza, and in collaboration with FrameLeap, we bring you the ultimate PC optimization guide for Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced. A huge thanks to Ubisoft for providing us with early access. Let's get into it. And we start with the most important and very first option. That's Raytracing Mode, which is available in 3 options: Extended, Standard, and Off. The extended option includes ray-traced reflections, while standard includes RTGI only. So as we can see in the test scene in the cave, enabling ray tracing makes a huge difference to the visuals. With ray-traced global illumination, we get proper light bounces between surfaces, with real physically based interactions. In the ship scene during the rain, we can clearly see sailors and other dynamic objects being accurately reflected in the rain puddles. These ray-traced reflections make the wet surfaces look far more realistic and add a noticeable level of immersion to the scene. In the final test scene, with dense vegetation, RTGI once again transforms the entire image. Natural light bounces between the foliage, shadows become softer and more realistic, and indirect lighting adds depth and volume to the environment. Without RTGI, the scene looks noticeably flatter and loses much of its visual richness. As for performance, here's the situation. Extended delivers 61 FPS, Standard gets 63, and Off gives 71 to 73. So the difference between Extended and Standard is literally just 2 FPS. In another scene with lots of effects like rain and fog, we get around the same numbers. Extended 61. Standard, about the same, 61 to 63, and Off, 65 to 66. Compared to running with ray tracing disabled, enabling ray tracing requires roughly 1 GB of additional VRAM. Alright, the next setting is Raytracing Quality, which according to the in-game description, is supposed to change the resolution of the ray tracing, the detail, and the overall quality. We checked a few different scenes, and honestly, didn't see much difference, except at the very lowest and very highest settings in this case. In our test scene, the wooden side panel of a market stall receives noticeably less bounced light on the lower settings, while the higher presets produce a more naturally illuminated result. In other scenes, however, light bouncing looked nearly identical. The same was true for ray-traced reflections. We also observed no measurable differences in CPU utilization or VRAM usage across these presets. Performance-wise, the low setting averaged 66 FPS, while medium, high, very high, and ultra all clustered around 60 to 61 FPS, delivering virtually identical performance. Let's move on. BVH Quality. BVH stands for Bounding Volume Hierarchy, and according to the in-game settings, it should change the amount of geometry preset in the ray-traced world. But in our tests, we don't see any difference at all. Not in image quality, not in VRAM or CPU usage. Performance-wise, we get 61 FPS on low, and about 60 to 61 on very high and ultra, so no difference. Let's keep going. Character quality is supposed to change the level of detail for non-playable characters, which includes shadows, mesh, detail, and shading. We weren't able to get perfectly static frames, so here's a direct comparison from Ubisoft. And yeah, you can see that detail improves as much as it can for NPCs. Now what about performance? In 4K, there is no difference between ultra low and ultra high. In 1080p, with everything turned down as much as possible, it's the same story. Ultra low is 170 FPS, ultra high is around 168. This 1 to 2 FPS difference is simply within the margin of error. Next setting is Hair Strands. As the name suggests, it increases the geometric complexity of character hair by rendering additional individual strands. There are 3 main options: off, player only, and all characters. In our testing, the visual improvement is fairly subtle. With hair strands enabled, hair gains a softer silhouette and additional loose strands around the edges, making it look slightly more natural. However, these differences are only really noticeable during close-up shots or conversations. At normal gameplay distances, even the off preset still looks surprisingly good, making the visual upgrade difficult to justify in many situations. Performance-wise, the off setting averages 76 FPS. Enabling hair strands for the player only reduces performance to around 73 to 75 FPS, while applying it to all characters drops the frame rate further to roughly 71 to 73 FPS. Overall, enabling the feature costs around 3 FPS, with the largest impact occurring when it is applied to every character in the scene. Moving on. Post effects are supposed to change the overall look. Based on some preview images, things like lens flares should be reduced. But honestly, we didn't notice any major change in effects overall. For example, on our test scene, the light falls the same. God rays and lens flares are still there. Everything looks normal. In terms of performance, there's not much difference either. Very low and low give around 90 to 88 FPS, and high is about 88. But very low tends to hold 90 a bit more consistently. Particles quality primarily affects particle-based effects, such as smoke, fire, rain, and other small environmental details. In our testing, however, the visual differences were minimal. During the rain test, we couldn't spot any difference in real time. Only after reviewing the footage in slow motion did we notice that the ultra-high preset renders a slightly higher density of raindrops. When comparing smoke effects across multiple locations, we were unable to identify any visible differences in quality. Performance-wise, all presets fluctuate between roughly 91 and 93 FPS, with no consistent performance advantage for any individual setting. These differences are well within the margin of error and do not represent any meaningful performance impact. VRAM usage also remains unchanged across all presets. Moving on. Water quality also has a lot of parameters, 6 in total, but the main difference is at the lower settings. Basically, the water looks more generic, less dynamic, and in a pirate game, we think having good-looking water really matters. In some places, the difference between very low and very high is pretty substantial in open sea. In harbors, though, where the water is calmer, you don't really see much of a difference. Ultra low and very high look basically identical in those spots. Now for performance. Here's what we saw. Ultra low, 141 FPS. Very low and low, 136. Medium, surprisingly 140. High, 130 to 128 FPS, while very high is more close to 128 FPS. So yeah, there's a noticeable drop at the top end. Let's check texture resolution quality that adjusts the overall resolution of texture assets throughout the game. While there are 7 presets available, the visual improvements are relatively modest. The largest difference can be seen between the lowest presets, where textures appear noticeably blurrier. From medium onwards, however, image quality changes very little, and distinguishing high, very high, and ultra high during normal gameplay becomes extremely difficult. Performance remains virtually unchanged across all presets at around 100 to 101 FPS. VRAM usage, however, increases steadily from approximately 7.2 GB at ultra low to around 8.4 to 8.5 GB at very high and ultra high. Despite the additional memory consumption, we found little visual benefit beyond the medium or high preset, making it the best balance between image quality and VRAM usage. Loading distance controls how far away objects and environmental details are loaded into the game world. It primarily affects the visibility of distant buildings, vegetation, and other environmental assets. In our tests, there is very little visible difference between the higher presets. The first noticeable reductions in detail appear at the low setting, while medium, high, very high, and ultra high remain fairly similar. At ultra low, however, the degradation becomes much more apparent. Performance-wise, ultra low occasionally reaches 75 FPS, but it also drops to around 73 FPS just like the other presets. Overall, all settings fluctuate within the 71 to 73 FPS range, which is well within the margin of error and does not represent any meaningful performance difference. Moving on to geometry quality, that controls the rendering distance and level of detail of world geometry, including distant objects and micropolygon geometry. It primarily affects how much environmental detail is visible, especially at longer distances. In our testing, the effect of this setting is clearly visible. As the quality decreases, the game gradually renders fewer environmental details, such as hanging moss, roof vegetation, and other small decorative objects. In 4K, geometry quality has virtually no measurable impact on either performance or VRAM usage. All presets fluctuate between roughly 73 and 75 FPS with no consistent differences in memory consumption. At 1080p, however, the setting has a more noticeable impact. Ultra low averages 151 FPS, medium 145 FPS, and ultra high 140 FPS. This represents only about 7% performance reduction while providing a clear improvement in distance geometry and environmental detail. Unlike in 4K, VRAM usage also increases by approximately 600 megabytes from around 7.7 GB at ultra low to roughly 8.3 GB at ultra high. Micropolygon controls the amount of memory allocated for rendering virtual geometry. According to the description, lowering this setting may introduce geometry pop-in. In our testing, however, we found virtually no visible difference between any of the 4 presets. We were also unable to reproduce any noticeable pop-in during normal gameplay. Performance remained identical across all settings. The only measurable change was VRAM usage, which gradually increased from approximately 7.2 GB on low to 7.5 GB on very high. While the game allocates more video memory at higher presets, we observed no measurable impact on image quality or performance. Screen space effects primarily controls screen space reflections and ambient occlusion. In our testing, the only noticeable visual difference appeared at the ultra-low preset, where reflections on water disappear almost entirely. From very low onwards, the image remains virtually identical across all settings. For ambient occlusion, we compared multiple indoor scenes, but were unable to identify any visible differences between ultra-low and the higher presets. Performance-wise, ultra-low averaged around 76 FPS, while every other preset clustered around 73 FPS. In indoor scenes, the pattern was similar. Ultra-low reached approximately 98 FPS, whereas all remaining presets averaged about 93 FPS. Although ultra-low is consistently a few frames faster, the visual trade-off, particularly the complete loss of water reflections, is difficult to justify. Light source quality controls the quality of local light sources and how they illuminate nearby objects. The most noticeable differences appear during nighttime scenes. In our test, higher presets allow nearby objects to receive proper illumination from local light sources and cast dynamic shadows. Beginning with the medium preset and below, these shadows disappear entirely, making the lighting noticeably flatter. Performance-wise, low and medium both average around 86 FPS. Once dynamic shadows are enabled at the high preset, performance drops to approximately 78 FPS, while very high and ultra high deliver virtually identical results at around 78 to 80 FPS. This means the main performance cost comes from enabling higher quality local lighting, with little to no additional penalty for the high presets. Shadow quality controls both shadow resolution and shadow draw distance. In our test scene, the most noticeable difference comes from shadow resolution rather than draw distance. The visual degradation becomes especially apparent at the lowest presets, where shadows become noticeably blockier and lose much of their fine detail. Comparing ultra-low directly with ultra-high, the difference is immediately obvious. Performance scales gradually with each preset. The lowest settings average around 80 to 85 FPS. Medium drops to roughly 75 FPS. High averages about 73 FPS. Very high around 71 FPS, while ultra-high reaches approximately 66 FPS. Overall, shadow quality is one of the more performance-intensive settings, but it also delivers one of the most noticeable visual improvements. Cloud quality. Cloud quality is intended to adjust the quality of volumetric clouds. In our testing, however, we were unable to identify any visible differences between the presets. Neither our rainy weather scene nor our daytime comparison showed noticeable changes in cloud resolution, density, or overall appearance. Performance, however, tells a different story. The low preset averages around 103 FPS, medium 98, high 96 FPS, while very high and ultra high both settle at approximately 93 FPS. Despite the measurable performance cost, we were unable to identify any visual improvements that would justify the loss in frame rate. The setting may influence cloud rendering in scenarios we did not encounter, but based on our testing, its impact appears negligible. Moving on to our next setting, fog quality should control the quality of volumetric fog and related atmospheric effects. In our testing, however, we were unable to identify any visual differences between the available presets. Even in scenes specifically chosen for their heavy atmospheric haze, the appearance of the fog remained virtually identical. Performance was equally unaffected. Every preset fluctuated between approximately 103 and 105 FPS, with the observed differences falling well within the margin of error. Based on our testing, fog quality appears to have no meaningful impact on either image quality or performance. Terrain quality controls the geometric detail of terrain surfaces, including terrain tessellation and surface refinement. Unlike geometry quality, it does not affect the amount of world geometry or draw distance. Instead, it changes the shape and complexity of terrain itself. In our testing, the differences are clearly visible. As the setting is reduced, roads, rocks, and uneven ground gradually lose geometric detail and become noticeably flatter. Performance-wise, the setting is effectively free. All presets fluctuate between roughly 110 and 113 FPS. RAM usage also remains essentially unchanged, making terrain quality one of the few settings that provides a visible improvement at virtually no performance cost. And we continue with scatter density that controls the density of small environmental objects such as grass, moss, and other ground clutter. In our beach test scene, the effect is clearly visible. Lowering the setting reduces the amount of vegetation and small decorative objects, although even the low preset still provides a fairly convincing image. The most notable difference is between ultra low and medium, while the higher presets look much more similar. Performance-wise, the impact is negligible. All lower presets average around 165 FPS, while high, very high, and ultra high also perform identically. We observed no measurable differences in CPU utilization or VRAM usage, making scatter density essentially free from a performance standpoint. Next up is deformation. According to the in-game description, this setting controls the level of detail and variety of terrain deformation, affecting the granularity and complexity of the landscape. In practice, the effect is most noticeable when interacting with soft ground such as dirt or mud. At the low preset, terrain deformation appears very coarse, leaving behind large blocky patches rather than well-defined footprints. Medium significantly improves the effect, producing much clearer impressions, while high generates detailed, localized footprints that closely match the shape of the character's boots. Despite the visual improvement, the performance impact is essentially negligible. Frame rates remain virtually identical across all three presets, while VRAM usage increases by only around 100 megabytes. Moving on to terrain texture quality. As the name suggests, this setting affects only terrain textures. Rocks, vegetation, and other environmental assets remain unchanged, making this one of the more specialized graphics options. In our testing, the visual difference was surprisingly small. Even when comparing very low directly with very high, the improvement was only noticeable at extreme close-up distances. During normal gameplay, it was almost impossible to tell the presets apart. VRAM usage, however, steadily increases with each step, rising from around 7.8 GB at very low to approximately 8.1 GB at very high. Given the negligible visual improvement, we don't think the highest presets justify the additional memory usage. Finally, let's compare the game's built-in presets. Rather than focusing on individual settings, this comparison shows how the overall image changes as we move from the highest preset all the way down to the lowest, before switching back to the maximum settings for one final comparison. The most noticeable visual changes come from terrain geometry, shadows, and overall environmental density. As the presets are reduced, roads and uneven ground lose geometric detail, vegetation becomes less dense, and the world gradually feels flatter and less immersive. The jungle scene highlights these differences even more clearly. At the highest settings, indirect lighting, shadow quality, and dense foliage combine to create a much richer looking environment. Lower presets gradually strip away that detail, making the scene noticeably less convincing. Performance, however, scales much more aggressively. The lowest preset reaches around 151 FPS, while the highest non-ray trace preset averages about 95 FPS. Enabling RT Standard lowers performance to roughly 86 FPS, with RT Enhanced dropping it further to around 80 FPS. Finally, we compared the remake with the original 2013 release. While everyone else has been comparing screenshots, we decided to compare something a little different. Performance. The original is still significantly less demanding. At its maximum settings, it averages around 146 FPS, while the remake delivers roughly 93 FPS at ultra high. Even lowering the remake to the medium preset only raises performance to about 126 FPS, whereas the original continues to exceed 220 FPS at comparable settings without even fully utilizing the GPU. The gap becomes even more pronounced at the lowest presets. The remake reaches roughly 146 FPS, while the original still averages around 226 FPS, making it more than 50% faster in the same scene. Of course, that performance gap doesn't come out of nowhere. The remake features substantially denser geometry, more detailed environments, modern lighting, and significantly higher quality assets throughout the world. It looks far more impressive, but those visual improvements come at a considerable performance cost. Finally, let's compare the available anti-aliasing and upscaling options before moving on to our optimized settings. The game supports TAA, NVIDIA DLSS, AMD FSR, and Intel XeSS. At 4K with maximum settings, TAA averages around 38 to 40 FPS. DLSS 4 Quality raises performance to 56 to 58 FPS. Balanced reaches 71 to 73 FPS, while performance delivers around 83 FPS. FSR Quality also lands at roughly 56 to 58 FPS, making its performance nearly identical to DLSS in our testing. Overall, all of the modern upscaling solutions behaved exactly as expecting, delivering predictable performance gains across their presets. The moment you've all been waiting for. Optimized settings. Raytracing Mode. Enhanced or off for performance. If the system can handle ray tracing, Enhanced is the logical choice. It adds ray-traced reflections, which are especially valuable in a pirate game filled with water, wet surfaces, and rain, while costing only around 2 FPS compared to standard. If that level of performance is too demanding, it makes more sense to disable ray tracing entirely rather than use standard. Raytracing Quality, medium. As the low option may reduce indirect lighting accuracy, while medium already looks almost identical to the higher presets. BVH Quality, ultra high. We found no difference in performance, CPU utilization, or VRAM usage across the presets. Since ultra high carries no measurable penalty, there is no practical reason to lower it. Character Quality, ultra high. Even in CPU limited scenarios, the difference is only 1 to 2 FPS, well within the margin of error. Hair Strands, all characters, high or off. The visual improvements is subtle, adding a bit more strand detail to character hair, but the overall difference is difficult to notice during normal gameplay. Performance drops by only around 3 FPS, making all characters high a reasonable choice for image quality. However, if you're optimizing purely for frame rate, off is also an easy recommendation since the visual trade-off is minimal. Post effects, very low. Visual differences are minor, while very low can deliver a few more frames. Particles Quality, ultra high. All presets perform within the same FPS range and use the same amount of VRAM. Ultra high also renders slightly more raindrops, so it is the obvious choice when there is no measurable performance cost. Water Quality, medium. Medium delivers around 145 FPS in the open water test compared to approximately 130 FPS at high and 128 FPS at very high. The visual difference beyond medium is relatively modest, making medium the strongest performance to image quality balance. Texture resolution quality, medium. Beyond medium, visual improvements are minimal, while VRAM usage continues to increase significantly. Loading distance, very high. The performance difference between the presets is within the margin of error. Very high preserves distant vegetation and environmental detail without the unnecessary simplification seen at the lowest settings. Geometry quality, high. This setting has almost no performance impact in GPU-bound scenarios, such as 4K, while significantly improving distant geometry and environmental detail. At 1080p, however, the ultra-high preset costs roughly 8 to 9% performance compared to ultra-low, making high the better balance between image quality and GPU-limited performance. Micropolygon, high. The setting has no impact on frame rate, but higher values gradually allocate more VRAM. High provides additional memory for virtual geometry and potentially helps reduce pop-in. Screen space effects, low. Ultra-low removes water reflections, which is a poor trade-off in a game with so many wet and reflective surfaces. Low preserves the reflections, while higher presets provide no clear visible improvement. Light source quality, high. Dynamic local shadows appear at high. Very high and ultra-high provide almost no additional visual benefit. Shadow quality, high. This is one of the most demanding graphics settings, but high offers the best overall balance. Medium not only reduces shadow resolution at a distance, but can also cause nearby shadows to become noticeably blurrier. High preserves sharp, stable shadows without paying the significant performance cost of the very high and ultra-high presets. Cloud quality, low. We couldn't identify any visual differences despite a noticeable FPS loss at higher presets. Fog quality, low. No measurable differences in either visuals or performance. Terrain quality, ultra high. There is no meaningful performance or VRAM difference across the presets, while higher values preserve the most refined terrain geometry. Since ultra high is effectively free, there is no reason to stop at high. Scatter density, ultra high. Higher presets increase the amount of grass, moss, and small environmental clutter, while performance, CPU usage, and VRAM consumption remain unchanged. Ultra-high, therefore, provides the richest environment at no measurable cost. Deformation. High produces much cleaner and more realistic footprints on soft terrain with virtually no performance cost. Terrain texture quality, low. The visual improvement is only noticeable at extreme close range, while higher presets continue increasing VRAM usage. Let's compare our optimized settings against the ultra-high preset. After going through every graphics option individually, we were able to recover around 15 to 20% more performance while keeping the overall visual presentation remarkably close to the default ultra-high experience. During normal gameplay, the differences are genuinely difficult to notice unless you stop and examine individual details side by side. An additional benefit is lower VRAM usage. Our optimized preset reduces dedicated video memory consumption by roughly 2 GB, making it a much better fit for graphics cards with more limited memory, while also leaving additional headroom for future updates or higher resolution textures. But perhaps the most interesting result comes when we enable ray tracing. Thanks to those performance savings, our optimized plus RT enhanced preset actually outperforms the default ultra-high preset, while also delivering ray-traced global illumination and ray-traced reflections. In other words, by carefully tuning the settings, we're effectively getting RT enhanced almost for free. And to wrap it up, let's compare other GPUs from different segments: the RTX 5060 from the budget segment, the RTX 5070 from mid-budget, and the RTX 5080 from high budget. At 4K using the DLSS balanced, RTX 5060 averages around 53 FPS. RTX 5070 around 80 FPS, RTX 5080 around 106 FPS. At 1440p using DLSS balanced, RTX 5060 averages around 75 FPS. RTX 5070 around 108 FPS, RTX 5080 around 123 FPS. One final interesting observation during testing is that Black Flag Resynced consistently draws less power than we'd normally expect from these GPUs. Across all three cards, board power was typically around 20 to 25 watts lower than in most modern AAA titles, making the game surprisingly power efficient despite its visuals. That is all for today's optimization guide on Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced. We hope you enjoyed. Let us know if you have any comments, questions down below. Thanks again to Ubisoft for giving us early access. This has been Monza with Frame Leap. We'll see you in the next video.